Hi everybody, Miss Stecker here. So today we're going to go over how to solve quadratics. In class I have taught you 3 ways. So today we're just going to go over those 3 ways. I'm going to show you some example problems, talk about how you know which method to use, and then we're actually going to solve a few example problems. So let's get started. So again, we're just going to focus on solving quadratics and going over the 3 ways that I have already taught you how to solve them. So to solve a quadratic, you can use these methods. And so we have 3 of them. The first one that we talked about in class was solving by factoring. Okay? Solving by factoring. After that, we talked about how to solve by taking square roots. And then the last method we talked about was how to solve quadratics using the quadratic formula. So those were the 3 methods that we talked about, and you can only use some methods sometimes, other ones at different times. They're very specific, so we are going to go over them, when you would use them, and then how to use them. So the first one I want to talk about is factoring, because that was the first one that we talked about in class. So for factoring, okay, you use this method when you are given a trinomial. So you're given a trinomial and can complete the X puzzle, which I'll remind you what that is. So again, factoring, you're going to use it when you're given a trinomial. Remember, that just means that you have 3 terms. So when we look at this example number 1, we have 1, 2, 3. So this side, the left side, is a trinomial. The other requirement for factoring is you have to be able to complete that X puzzle. So here's what I mean. When I look at example number 1, okay, I need to factor it. It's a trinomial set up the way it's supposed to be. Remember, it's supposed to be ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So this one is already set up. I do not have to fix anything prior to starting. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw my little X puzzle. Because remember, your first step is to rewrite that middle term. I want to get rid of that 3x and write it a different way. So the top of my puzzle is going to be a times c, so 2 times negative 9. That's negative 18. The bottom is going to be negative 3. Now, remember, if you're decent at multiplication, you can probably come up with these faster. But if you struggle with multiplication, that's okay. Make your factor list of 18. So 18 is a pretty short list. You have 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. And that's it. Now, when I look at these pairs of numbers, I have to choose which one of these I'm going to put on the side. So here's how the puzzle works. Whatever 2 numbers you put on the sides, they have to multiply to give me negative 18, but then add to give me negative 3. So the only numbers I can make work is actually 3 and 6. But one of them is going to have to be negative because of that negative 18. And so when I look down here at the bottom, that's going to be a negative 3. And so because of that negative 3, this 6 is going to have to be negative, because this is going to be the same as 3 minus 6, which is going to give me that negative 3 when I add those 2 together. So these are the numbers that make this work. And this is the only set of numbers. There is not another set of numbers that make that X puzzle work. So now, I'm going to take this 3 and 6, and I'm going to rewrite this and get rid of this 3x right here. So here's what it looks like. So 2x, I'm going to put 6 with 2, so I'm going to do minus 6x plus 3x minus 9. Okay? So all I've done so far is I got rid of that 3x and I put the 2 numbers up from the side of my x puzzle in the middle. I just rewrote that middle term and got rid of it. The next thing I need to do is group them and take the GCF. So I'm going to group them. When you group them, it's the same spots every time, around the first two terms and then around the last two terms. Now I'm going to take out my GCF. So when I look at this first one, I've got 2x squared and 6x. 2 and 6 are both even numbers, so I'm actually going to take out a 2x. I'm taking out the 2 because of the fact they're even numbers. And I can take out an x because both of those terms have an x attached to them. And so when I do that, when I take out that 2x right there, I'm going to be left with x minus 3 on the inside. Now this 3, the reason I knew it was a 3 is because 2 goes into 6 3 times. So when I have 6 and I take out 2, this is how many times 2 goes into 6. 3 times. Okay? And then I pretty much do the same thing back here. So I'm going to drop that plus sign in the middle. 3x and 9, those are multiples of 3. So I'm going to actually take out a 3. And then, so here's how you can think about it. 3x, I had 3x to start with. I took the 3 out, so there's an x left. And then to figure out what this number is, it's how many times 3 goes into negative 9, which is negative 3. These two set of parentheses should always match. So if they don't, you've just done it a little bit off, okay? So then I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to take my GCFs. They're written in green. It's kind of hard to tell on the video, but they're written in green. So I have 2x plus 3 and then x minus 3. Okay? If you stop right here, all you've done is factored it. You did not actually solve it yet. In order to solve this, you need to use the zero product property, which is where we bring down that equals 0, because now I'm going to use the zero product property to figure out what these x's actually are. Okay? And here's how we do that. You just take each set, each factor, the stuff in parentheses, and you set them equal to 0. So there's 2x plus 3 equals 0. This one is just going to be x minus 3 equals 0. This one is easier to solve. It's just a one-step equation. You're going to add 3 to get rid of that. So I'm just going to add 3 to both sides. And I'm going to be left with x is equal to 3. So there's that one. This one, it's a two-step equation, but it's pretty much the same stuff. In order to get rid of that plus 3, I'm going to subtract 3. I'm going to end up with 2x is equal to negative 3. Divide by 2. And I end up with x is equal to negative 3 over 2. And remember, for me, it is okay to have a fraction. It's okay if it's an improper fraction. Leave it as a fraction. Okay? This is one example where it was factored and solved. So factoring is right here. Doing the zero product property is the solving part, and that's on this bottom side. Okay? So this is how you factor it. Now, I've got one more example down there for factoring before we move on to the second method. I'm not going to walk this one all the way through with you. I do want to talk about something before I let you have a couple minutes to work on it on your own. So it says, if the equation is not equal to 0, then you will just need to move this stuff to fix it. So let me explain when I say move this stuff to fix it. So when I look at this, I have 3x squared plus 16x equals negative 5. This side right here, this right side, is supposed to be 0. If I'm going to factor it, I need it to be 0. And so when I say move this stuff, I'm talking about either add or subtract to get the stuff away from the right-hand side. So in order to do that for this problem, I'm just going to add 5. And remember, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. And that's other side of the equal sign. So if I were to draw a little line right here, I have to do it once on this side and once on this side. These 5s are going to cancel out. And when something cancels out, that number is 0, okay? So this is now 0 on this right-hand side. I now need to decide where I'm going to put that 5. okay? I can't combine it with the 3x squared, and I cannot combine it with the 16x because this is just a 5. Those are not like terms. So this is actually going to become my C value. And so here's what the problem looks like. 3x squared plus 16x plus 5 equals 0. So all you did was take that -5 and you moved it over there to the left, and it became +5 because we moved it across the equal sign. That's what I mean when I say move this stuff. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause this video, spend about 2 to 3 minutes on this problem. Once you finish solving this problem, push play on this video and I'll show you what the answers are. Okay, so go ahead and push pause and work that problem out for me. So now you should have this one worked out, so let's go ahead and check out the answer. So remember, we moved that 5, so then I just start my X puzzle. It was 15 in the top, 16 in the bottom, so 1 times 15 gave me 15, but then 1 plus 15 gave me 16. So I paired them up on the inside right here, and you could have done the opposite of what I did and we still would have ended up with the same answer, but I put the 1 with the 3 and 15 with 5 because in my head 15 went better with 5. So for this first one, I can only take out an X, which left 3X plus 1 inside. For this one, I could take out a 5 because 15 and 5, those are multiples of 5. When you do that, you have 3X plus 1 left. So then I just rewrote it. I got X plus 5 and then 3X plus 1. But remember, if you stop right here, you actually did not solve it. You have to do the zero product property, which is this part. So I just took each set of parentheses and I set them equal to 0. This one was just -5. It ends up being the opposite of what it is inside those parentheses. This one is a 2-step equation, so it takes a little bit longer to solve it. But just subtract 1 and then divide by 3, and I end up with a fraction, which remember is okay. You can have fractions, but that is how you factor. Factoring is the method that takes a little bit of time to do. It typically takes Algebra 1 students like 2 to 3 minutes to get through these problems, but if you take your time and do them right, you're going to have the right answer and be able to answer whatever question is there. So make sure you take your time on these. If you know you have to factor, take your time. Okay, and the second method that we talked about was taking square roots. So a couple things to know. You only use this method when there is no b value or it does not look like your typical trinomial. So no b value or does not look like your typical trinomial. And so I've got 2 examples right here. The first example is the one that has the no b value. This is what they look like. Now, if you forget about that no b value thing, your first move is probably going to be to subtract 7 and get the 7 over here. Well, when you do that, this is what you end up with. And you end up with 3x squared minus 12 equals 0. But that b value is missing, the one with the x. It's missing. And so factoring is not the fastest way to solve this particular problem. So instead of trying to move that 7, I know I'm going to use taking square root, so I'm actually going to move all of the stuff away from this x. So I'm going to take square root, so I've got to just get everything away from x. I'm going to start with the 5, always start at the number in the back. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. I'm going to be left with 3x squared equals 12, because 7 plus 5 is 12. Now I need to get rid of that 3. Any number in the front like that, you just need to divide to get rid of it. So I'm going to divide, and I'm going to be left with x squared is equal to 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then I'm left with x squared equals 4. So this x is not technically all the way by itself because we still have that squared. So in order to get rid of that squared, I'm actually going to take the square root. So a squared and the square root are inverses of each other. They are opposites and they cancel each other out. So then I'm just left with x is equal to plus or minus 2 because the square root of 4 is 2. Do not forget this plus or minus symbol. We have to have that in there. So if you forget what the square root is, I do want to point out on your calculator that you do have a square root function on here. On your calculator, it's this 7 down here, diagonal from 7, that x squared button. The square root is in blue. So in order to get there, you're just going to hit second x squared to get your square root. Type in a 4, and then it'll give you what the square root is. But I want you to know your calculator only gives you the positive version of it. So you need to make sure that when you write out your answer, that you have that plus or minus symbol. Okay? Now let's take a look at example number 2. Example number 2 is the one where it does not look like your typical trinomial. These work a little bit different because we have to deal with these parentheses. So, again, I know I'm going to use taking square roots because this does not look like a trinomial. So, I'm just going to move everything I can away from that x. So, I'm going to start with adding 36 to both sides. When I do that, I'm going to be left with x plus 4 squared equals 36. Now, here's where we need to have a quick little discussion. This x plus 4, I can't do anything with it because it's on the inside of those parentheses, and I have to get rid of that squared before I can do anything with inside. So, just like we did earlier, to get rid of that squared, we're going to take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I'm going to be left with x plus 4, because that square root and the square, they cancel each other out, so it's now gone, equals the square root of 36. Remember, if you don't know, type it in on your calculator. So you end up with the square root of 36 is 6. So we're going to have plus or minus 6. Don't forget your plus or minus. This is where a lot of people mess this kind of problem up. Now we need to deal with the fact that this is a plus or minus 6. This is actually two numbers right here. One is a positive 6, the other one is a negative 6. In order to deal with it, I need to split it up. Okay? So I'm going to have x plus 4 equals positive 6, and x plus 4 equals negative 6. And then you just finish solving. Most of the time, these are either 1 or 2 step equations, so they're not bad. You just have to, this is a 1-step equation. We got to get rid of that 4. So I'm just going to subtract 4. And I end up with x is equal to 2 on this one. And this one, I'm going to subtract 4. And I end up with x is equal to negative 10 for this one. So that is my 2 examples on how to solve by taking square roots. This is personally my favorite one because it's the fastest one to me. I can do these problems the fastest. The only downfall to this one is it only works when there's no b value or it does not look like your normal trinomial. Okay? Okay, and the last method that we can use to solve quadratics is using the quadratic formula. So we're going to use this method in place of factoring. So you can do it instead of factoring, or if you cannot figure out the x puzzle. So if you don't feel like factoring something, you can go straight to the quadratic formula. Or if you try to factor something and you can't get the x puzzle to work, you only can use the quadratic formula. So this one is used in place of factoring, okay? This method works on any trinomial where you can identify the a, b, and c values. And that's the key part right here. You have to be able to identify the a, b, and c values. If you can't, the quadratic formula is not going to work. Okay? So I've got 2 examples right here. I'm only going to do one of them with you, and I'm going to do the more difficult one, which is the second one. So, example number 1, pretty straightforward. It has a trinomial on the left. So we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Number 2 is slightly more difficult because this right side is not equal to 0. So before I can decide to use the quadratic formula, I need to make this right side be 0. Easy fix. you're just going to subtract 3x because that's the inverse, so I'm going to get rid of it. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. Those 3x's are going to go away. Now I need to decide if I can combine that 3x to the 4x squared and that 115. And the answer is no, I cannot, because those are not like terms. So then I now have to decide, is this going to be my a, b, or c value? So remember, it's always ax squared plus bx plus c. It's going to look like example number 1 right here. So this 3x is actually my b value. So when I rewrite this, it's going to be 4x squared minus 3x minus 115 equals 0. And now I'm all set up to use the quadratic formula. Me personally, I would automatically go to the quadratic formula because if I were to do the x puzzle, the top number would be whatever 4 times 115 is, and that's a big number that I don't want to have to deal with. So me personally, I would default to the quadratic formula no matter what. So here is the quadratic formula. What we now need to do is identify those a, b, and c values and then take those values and plug them in to the quadratic formula, okay? So I'm going to write them over here on the side. My a value for this one is 4. My b value is negative 3. And my c value is negative 115. Now all I have to do is take 4, negative 3, negative 115, and plug them into the right numbers over here, or the right spots over here. So I'm going to start with x equals. Always start with that. I've got negative, and remember, anytime you plug in a number, you need to have parentheses around it. So my b value, that's the first thing I've got to plug in, so negative 3. Plus or minus, I've got the square root right here. B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And once you get better at this, you're going to be able to say the quadratic formula just like I did with the letters and then just put the numbers in their place. It may take you a little bit longer to plug them in, and that's okay. The most important thing is that you plug in the numbers in the correct spots. That's the most important thing. Okay, so now we need to focus on actually simplifying this correctly. This is correct so far. We've entered in our numbers into the correct places for the quadratic formula. Now I just need to simplify it so that way I can use my calculator. So here's how I do that. I bring down that x equals. This is negative 3, so that's going to turn into a positive 3. I bring down my plus or minus, and I'm also going to bring down that square root. So when I type this into my calculator, okay, I'm actually only going to type in the stuff on the inside of this square root, underneath. So I'm going to grab my calculator because these are big numbers. I don't want to do that in my head. So I'm going to grab my calculator, and I'm just going to type in all that stuff. I just highlighted it in pink. So negative 3 squared minus 4 times 4 times negative 115. Make sure that it matches exactly. If it doesn't, it's going to mess it up. And this is what I get, 1849. That's right. Remember, these numbers can get big, and that's okay. So I've got 1849 underneath that square root. And that's going to be all over 2 times 4. That's going to give me 8. So far, so good. I'm actually almost done with this already. Now I need to split this up because of that plus or minus sign right there. Remember, your calculator does not have that plus or minus button, so you have to type it in as 2 separate things. So we're just going to split this up. So one of them will be 3 plus the square root over 8. And then the other one is going to be 3 minus the square root over 8. So what I've done right here is I just drew these little arrows to address that plus or minus symbol. This one is my plus sign, this one is my minus symbol. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not know what the square root of 1849 is, and I probably will never know that off the top of my head. So that's where the calculator comes back in. Now, in class, I talked to you guys about how to get the fraction on this calculator, the TI-84. As a quick refresher, it's the alpha button, so this green button up here at the top. You hit alpha y equals, and this gives you your fraction menu. If you just click enter, it gives you that little fraction. And then all you have to do is type in the fraction exactly how you see it. So 3 plus the square root of 1849 over 8, and then click enter. And remember, it is okay to get fractions, so because I've got 23 over 4 right there, that's totally fine. That's how I'm going to leave my answer. So x equals 23 over 4 for this one. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the other one. Okay? So alpha y equals, but it's going to be 3 minus this time. 1849 over 8. Make sure you type it in correct. Sometimes you'll hit a different button on accident. Just make sure that you're typing it in right. And that one gave me -5. So I get x equals -5 on this one. Okay? And this is the quadratic formula all together. So all I did, I had to move that 3x at the beginning, but normally they're going to look like this trinomial. So I plugged it into the quadratic formula. I simplified the 3 things I was supposed to simplify, and then I split it up and typed it into my calculator. Okay? Now, here's what I want you to try. I want you to try example number 1 on your own. I'm going to give you, so I want you to pause this video and I want you to work on it for like 2 to 3 minutes. Once you get finished with it, I want you to push play and I'll show you what the correct answer is. So go ahead and pause this now and I'll see you in a little bit. As promised, here is the correct answer. So when I did this, first, remember I identified my A, B, and C values, plugged it in, simplified my 3 numbers, split it up, and then I used my calculator. A lot of times with the quadratic formula, you're going to end up with decimals, and so it's best to use your calculator. So these were the actual decimals that I got, but remember, my go-to rounding is always the hundredth spot, and so I rounded, and these stayed at the 5s because they both had 4s behind those 5s right there. And so because I rounded, you are technically supposed to use the little approximation symbols, which is the squiggly equal sign. So try to keep that in mind. If you round, you need to have x is approximately, and then what the decimal is. Okay? So as a quick recap, we have now gone over all 3 of these methods: factoring, taking square roots, and the quadratic formula. Factoring works when you have a trinomial and it's equal to 0. You factor it and then solve it. You're going to get 2 answers most of the time. Taking square roots is our other one. You use this one when there is no b value or it doesn't look like your typical trinomial. So those 2 are going to look like this. Here's the one that has the missing b value, and then here's the one that does not look like your normal trinomial. These are the 2 situations that you would use taking square roots. And then here's the quadratic formula, which we just did. It also works on trinomials, but there are some trinomials like this that cannot be factored. When you get to those and you cannot figure out that X puzzle, you are required to use the quadratic formula. If you like the formula more than factoring, then you can also use this. Okay? So those are 3 methods that you have whenever you are solving quadratic equations. Now to close out this lesson, I have one more example for us to do, but before we get to it, I have this little reminder right here. I want you to remember, once you solve the equation, those solutions tie back to the graph. Those solutions to the equation are the zeros of the graph. And remember, zeros are where the graph crosses the x-axis. So they go together. They tie hand in hand. The solutions are the zeros on the graph. Okay, so here's my example. It just says consider the function 3x squared minus 2 equals 25. And then the question just says, what is the solution set of the equation? Does not specify which method you have to use. That's actually up to you. And so when I write this, I've got 3x squared minus 2 equals 25. The first thing that I notice is that 1, it's not equal to 0, and 2, it's not a trinomial. So in my head, because it's not a trinomial, I want to use taking square roots because that's the fastest way to solve them. So all we have to do is check to make sure that there's no b value, and if there's not, then we can. So when I look at this, the b value is going to be the one that's with the x by itself. There's my 3x squared, so this is my a value. I don't see the other x, so these numbers become my c value, which means I can use taking square roots, which is the fastest way. Keep that in mind. So now, all I have to do, because I'm doing taking square roots, just get everything away from that x. So I'm going to add 2. Remember, you got to do it to both sides. Both sides. These cancel. And I'm left with 3x squared equals 27. To get rid of that 3, I'm just going to divide. And I'm left with x squared is equal to 9. And last, I have to get rid of that squared. And remember, the inverse of a squared is the square root. So I'm going to take the square root. And then my solution set is x is equal to plus or minus 3. Because the square root of 9 is 3. And in Algebra 1, we have that plus or minus symbol. So this answer right here, remember, can also be written as x equals negative 3 and positive 3. And they're going to be in those set notation brackets. Here are your 2 zeros to the graph. So yes, these are solutions to the equation, but they also tie back to the graph, okay? So here's what I want to do with this graph. It says sketch the graph and identify the zeros. These are actually our zeros, so we've already identified them. Now all we have to do is place them on the graph. So I'm going to have 1 0 at negative 3, the other 0 at positive 3. So these 2 dots right here represent my zeros. And now as far as the graph part, the directions actually say to sketch the graph, so it does not have to be 100% accurate. As long as it looks like a parabola, which is the U-shaped graph, you're going to be okay. So that is a 3x squared, so it's positive, so it is going to open up. So we just need to draw a U-shaped graph called a parabola. And it's going to look something like this. Remember, yours might be a little bit off from mine. But if it's a U, like if it's a U shape and looks like a parabola, you'll be fine. And there you go. So I want you to know, every time you solve one of these, there's a graph that goes with it. So this one, if we were to graph it on our calculator, the graph would be very, very similar to this one. All right. Good job today.